Good afternoon and welcome. Today is Thursday, July 27th. I am Allison Johnston, a Professional Development Coordinator for Maryland's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to our presentation, a general PORII overview. Before we begin, I would like to remind you of a few things about today's webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. This session is being recorded and will be available for future use on our YouTube channel. There is one handout for today's presentation, and it can be found in the handout section on the panel box. Our presenters today are Nicole Kropfelder, Statewide QE Director, Dawn Harrison, Western's QE Director, Mark Celeste, Southern Region QE Director, and Caroline Bailey, Eastern Shore QE Director. Now it is my pleasure to turn this presentation over to Deputy Secretary Bernie Simons for a special greeting.
So thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Bernie.
Oh, okay. All right. I just want to make sure. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our policy on reportable incidents and investigations, otherwise known as PORII, to attend this training, which is going to be facilitated, as was just mentioned in the introduction, by our DDA Quality Enhancement Team. Obviously, we have covered one person from each region who does QE as the lead, and our headquarters staff also, Nicole. So our number one priority is everything we do is always about supporting people and keeping them health and safety. And that's extremely important to all of us who are on this call, who work at DDA, families, individuals and supports, agencies, case management, people who are self-directing their own services. And, you know, that's why we wanted to do this training today based on our current policy. And for all of those who utilize resources that we've given within your agencies also. In my mind, training is always the first step that, you know, we need to work together to review PORII policy and then create an infrastructure to update as needed. And you know, you just don't make a policy and do it once and it's one and done. You know, you need to learn, where is it? What do we need to do? And ensure that there's always ongoing health and safety for people with developmental disabilities in Maryland. I've asked Nicole, our Director of QE, to begin the process of working with and many of you know, we have a Quality Advisory Council, to put together a collaborative group to review the current policy and to make recommendations back to DDA on necessary updates and changes that need to be to keep us in the forefront of where we need to be about protection and you know, around issues obviously around safety and health, etc. So, you know, I look forward to working together and to reviewing those recommendations. And now with that, I'm going to turn this over to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. I just want to also add that I also personally look forward to the continued collaboration with our Quality Advisory Council and our partners in strengthening our PORII policy. I also want to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. It looks like we have a great turnout today. And given the length of this presentation, the importance of this topic, and given the need to be specific as possible, we will accept all of your questions and release a Q&A within 2 weeks of today's webinar. So at any point throughout the webinar, please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat box. I would also like to remind all of you that there will be another PORII training specifically for people and families that will incorporate plain language. Today's webinar terminology is directly from the PORII policy. So before we get started with the presentation, we'd like to conduct a small poll so we can see who is joining us today. So please, if you can, pick one of the following choices on this slide: a current DDA provider service agency, a vendor or service provider agency, self-advocate, or other. Allison, I don't believe that's okay. All right, we can go ahead and close the poll, Allison. Thank you. So it looks like we have a mixture. We have we have over 400 attendees on today's webinar, so it's a great turnout for today. So again, as Bernie stated, the purpose of today's webinar is to ensure people's health and safety. We do hope this training is utilized for all as an additional resource. Today, we will be reviewing some of the ins and outs of PORII. There will be a lot of information that will be covered, but by the conclusion of this training, each of you will be able to understand the purpose of PORII, who it pertains to, the types of incidents, reporting process and expectations, and some incident reporting reminders. We have also included the direct link to PORII, so you can pull it right up and have direct access to the policy. Please remember, this policy has not changed. Next slide, please. So what is PORII? PORII is the policy on reportable incidents and investigations. PORII outlines the following requirements of how to report, when to report, different types of incidents to report, the responsibilities of reporters, and the requirements of submitted documentation. Next slide. PORII was developed to protect the rights and to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of individuals with developmental disabilities receiving services from DDA licensed and DDA funded providers. PORII applies to any incident that threatens the health and safety and/or has the potential to cause harm to an individual. An incident includes an allegation or confirmed incident of an event that adversely affects or has the potential to negatively affect the health, safety, and welfare of an individual. Next slide. Who does PORII apply to? On this slide, you can see the various entities that PORII applies to, from participants to DDA staff to providers to quality improvement organizations and many others. Please also remember, many that are on this slide are considered to be mandated reporters. Next slide. Some general requirements of PORII are incident reporting. This refers to appendices 1A through L, which explains the most common types of incidents that should be reported and which we will capture later in today's webinar. At times, there may be some incidents that are not necessarily described or outlined in PORII and classified as other, but each provider, support broker, or financial management and counseling service, also known as FMCS, shall have an internal protocol to determine if other incidents should be reported and investigated. Agency internal protocol. Each reporting entity shall have developed their own internal protocols to ensure compliance with PORII. Next slide.
Let's discuss an agency internal protocol now. This means operating procedures should be developed that outline the responsibilities and roles of all staff in regard to the following: how to identify an incident, how and when to report and investigate, reviewing and addressing incidents, monitoring the follow-up of incidents, and identify the needed trainings to ensure all of the above are completed. This protocol should also include the role of a standing committee and the required trainings for the committee to complete outside of PORII. Next slide, please. The protocol should also include the use of the agency investigation report, also known as the AIR, the standing committee review form, and the AIR addendum. These forms are to document appropriate follow-up and show a review has been completed by the standing committee. Next slide, please. To complete investigations, each agency is to have a designated and qualified staff to report and investigate incidents. These staff members are required to complete investigations training. They are to uphold all the requirements noted and outlined in PORII. We have added to our provider and CCS matrix a link for labor relations alternative investigations training, a recommendation that you may wish to consider. Investigations training is chosen by the agency itself. DDA does not provide specific investigations training. Next slide, please. Policy distribution consists of each agency is responsible for posting PORII along with agency-specific internal protocols at all licensed sites and electronically to all participants, staff, consultants, and volunteers. Along with the specific internal protocols being posted is also a list of emergency contacts internally within the provider agencies, FMCSs, CCS, and also the DDA regional office contact information. All of this information should be made available both electronically and posted in-house. Next slide, please. Requirements. Freedom of retaliation. We always want everyone to feel as if they can report anything without having the fear of them getting in trouble. It is the expectation that all reporting entities, remember previous slides of where we discussed who PORII applies to, could be providers, CCSs, and quality improvement organizations, have measures in place to help reduce the potential for retaliation when one makes a report. Comprehensive approach. As we all understand, ensuring participants' safety and well-being is our main priority. We want to ensure a full approach is developed in reviewing and conducting investigations. The Office of Healthcare Quality, also known as OHCQ, triages, reviews each incident, prioritizes each incident, and investigates all of Type 1 incidents. We will break down the priority categories and different types of Type 1 incidents that are reviewed by OHCQ later in our training. As OHCQ is triaging all Type 1 incidents, regional offices, quality enhancement teams are triaging all incidents and investigates all Type 2 incidents. We will discuss Type 2 incidents later in the training too. Please remember, at times, there may be a Type 2 incident that comes in, but the regional office triage feels it may need to be heightened to OHCQ for further review. Please also note, when we discuss this policy further, and we note working days and/or business days, that refers to Monday through Friday, excluding state holidays. This does not mean you only report on those particular working or business days. This just explains that this is when OHCQ and the DDA regional office are working and triaging each incident. Next slide, please.
Here we will go over the responsibilities as it relates to reporting incidents. The number one priority and responsibility of anyone reporting an incident is to ensure the health, safety, and/or well-being of any participant involved. This becomes especially important during allegations of abuse or neglect. It's not enough for management to be notified of a situation that occurred on Saturday evening on Monday morning, as this has now allowed the accused staff to continue to work with the individual over the weekend. Can then be cited for failure to protect the individual. It is the responsibility of both the agency and the CCS to notify families advocates, and external entities such as Adult Protective Services, Child Protective Services, the police, and so forth. When making an incident report, providers are to report to DDA via PCIS2 within 1 working day of the incident or date of discovery. Please remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Support brokers and/or vendors do not have access to PCIS2. Therefore, they should report an incident to their CCS. The CCS is then responsible for completing the remainder of the incident reporting process. This would entail making appropriate notifications, completing an incident report, then conducting your own investigation by following your policies and procedures, and completing an AIR. Please also remember the date of discovery is the date the agency director or designee was advised of the incident. Each agency shall investigate each incident per their internal protocols. Submit your AIR within 10 working days of discovery, and then submit to your standing committee for review for each incident reported. Each provider shall continue to follow up and take any necessary actions to resolve whether it is a systematic change and/or case by case. Next slide, please. Support broker and financial management counseling services responsibilities. As stated previously, the number 1 priority and responsibility of anyone reporting an incident is to ensure the health, safety, and/or well-being of any participant involved. It is the responsibility of the support broker and the FMCS to notify families and/or advocates, the CCSs, and such as APS, CPS, law enforcement, and so on. Support brokers and FMCS currently do not have the ability to submit an incident report in PCIS2. Therefore, they are responsible to report an incident to the participant's CCS. I would encourage you to contact them via phone and email to make a report. Please remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Reporting to the CCS should still be reported within 1 working day of the incident or date of discovery. Next slide, please.
Here is a flowchart that outlines what is required for a reportable and internally investigated incident. If you click the link, you can download the chart for future review. Now let's look at the process step by step. Next slide, please. Here is a flowchart that outlines what is required for a reportable and internally investigated incident. Red is for reportable and yellow is for internally investigated. The first step is to always ensure the health and safety of the participant or participants. Then you would make the appropriate notifications, which should include the legal guardian, DHS representative, and CCS. And then decide per PORII, is this incident considered to be reportable or internally investigated? If it is reportable, you will follow the red lines. You will submit the incident report into PCIS2 within 1 business day. You will conduct the investigation, and then an AIR is to be submitted within 10 business days of discovery. If the incident is an internally investigated incident, you will follow the yellow lines. The incident is to be reported internally within the agency within 1 business day. Then the next step, whether it's internally investigated or reportable, is the start of an investigation. Next slide, please. So as we stated, the investigation occurs, whether that means internal staff conducts or the investigation is conducted by OHCQ. If OHCQ does an investigation, the provider is still responsible for conducting an investigation based on their own internal policies and procedures. So here you need to pay close attention, as this shows the difference between reportable and internally investigated incidents. If the incident is reportable, let's follow the red lines. You will have 10 business days from the date of discovery to submit the agency investigative report known as the AIR. If the incident is internal, we are following the yellow lines, so you have 21 business days from the date of discovery to submit the AIR. So this is the difference between the two. As we continue to follow the lines, and whether your incident is reportable or internally investigated, you are to submit your IRs and your AIRs to the standing committee for a review. Next slide, please. The prior slide, we left off at a yellow box of submitting your incident report and AIR to the standing committee.
The Standing Committee shall review all documents and reports and provide any applicable feedback as necessary. At times, they may suggest additional training for staff, an additional follow-up in the future on the person, or other recommendations. Prior to the conclusion, the Standing Committee is to approve the reports. Once approved, the agency is to follow up on any matters as suggested by the Standing Committee. Now, here is another major difference between reportable versus internal. For internal incidents, you are required to submit your internal incidents on a quarterly basis within PCIS2 on an A5 report. Our next slide, we will go over the quarterly reporting schedule. We hope you find this flowchart helpful in understanding the process and expectations related to reportable versus internally investigated incidents. Next slide, please. This slide shows the reporting periods of each quarterly report based on the calendar year and their due date to the DDA. The DDA QE regional staff pull these reports from PCIS2 for our review. These reports are also reviewed by OHCQ during the relicensure period and/or during an investigation if needed. Please keep in mind the schedule of reports being due is on a calendar year, not on a fiscal year. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Caroline. And just as a reminder, this is Nicole speaking, and we're going to move forward to the OHCQ incident prioritization. Sorry about that. Again, all of this is noted in great detail in PORII. We will begin at the bottom and work our way up. Immediate jeopardy. This is when an incident presents imminent, immediate, and serious threat of injury, harm, impairment, or death of an individual. OHCQ will begin an investigation within 2 working days. High, when an individual is not in imminent danger, but the incident presents a situation where a serious threat exists to the individual's health or safety that could compromise the individual's physical and/or mental health. Here, OHCQ will begin their investigation within 10 working days. Medium, when an incident involves a situation or there is an opportunity for harm that would minimally affect the individual, OHCQ will begin an investigation within 30 working days. Administrative review, the incident presents a minimal risk of harm or no harm at all, and an on-site investigation is not needed. At times, the reporting entity, CCS or providers or others, may have already submitted documentation addressing the fact that the incident has been addressed with implementation of corrective and preventative measures. At this point, OHCQ will communicate electronically with the reporting entity. Referrals. Referrals occur when there is an opportunity for criminal issues and require legal assistance, or if the incident is outside of the OHCQ jurisdiction. OHCQ will make a referral within 1 working day if necessary. And then there are times no further action is taken, and this is due to the incident being resolved appropriately at the time of reporting. This means the participant's health and safety are assured and the reporter has implemented corrective actions. The DDA will review the AIR and report to OHCQ if further action is needed. Next slide. We are now going to have a polling question related to the information we have gone over so far. Within how many days is the agency investigative report due after the date of discovery? Please select one, and we'll give everyone a few moments to select one. So you have the options of 20, 15, 5, or 10 working days. Allison, we can close the poll. The answer is 10 working days after the date of discovery. Please remember, if you need a reference point, refer to the IR in PCIS2, which provides the date that it is due. Next slide. What are reportable incidents? They are significant events or situations that, because of the severity or the sensitivity of the situation, needs to be reported. Here we note the type 1 incidents that are all reportable via PCIS2 within 1 working day. Type 1 incidents include abuse, neglect, death, injury, hospital admission ER visit, choking, and medication errors. The first step when an incident occurs prior to reporting is always to ensure the safety of individuals. This could mean you remove them from the environment, put safety measures in place immediately, or provide first aid until further evaluation. But safety is all of our #1 priority. You are required to notify the regional office quality enhancement staff immediately via the regional office QE triage email or phone. Also, a submitted incident report into PCIS2 is required within 24 hours of the data discovery, and additional team members of the participant are alerted, and OHCQ completes their investigation process upon notification. Next slide, please. Internally investigated incidents. As discussed earlier, each agency is responsible for developing their own internal protocol related to PORII. Within this protocol, it outlines the responsibility in regards to internal investigated incidents, also known as A5. Agencies are responsible for investigating events or situations. Examples would include a type 1, type 2 incidents within 1 working day of discovery. Each agency ensures the health and safety of the participant and follows their internal protocols related to investigations. This should include within 21 business days, the agency submits an AIR to their standing committee for review and then submits all to the DDA and OHCQ on a quarterly basis as noted on the previous slides. Please also remember that when there has been 3 internally investigated incidents of any kind within 4 weeks regarding the same participant, then that would be considered a reportable incident and an IR is to be completed in PCIS2. You should provide information to include the previous 2 incidents in the report. Next slide.
The first type 1 incident we will discuss is abuse. The definition noted in PORII states, abuse is the willful infliction of injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, punishment with resulting physical harm, pain, or mental anguish. This includes, but is not limited to physical abuse, hitting or choking, verbal, mental abuse such as yelling, name calling, or belittling behaviors, sexual abuse, and seclusion. Abuse can occur between staff and individual, individual to individual, and non-staff to individual. An example of non-staff to individual would be a family member or a community member causing any of the above description of abuse to an individual. Next slide, please. Abuse needs to be reported when there is any suspected or confirmed incident of physical, sexual, psychological abuse, inhumane treatment, or a violation of an individual's rights that involves staff and an individual or involving 2 or more individuals. Next slide, please. Abuse may be treated as an internally investigative incident when an individual has a history of making false allegations, which should be documented within their person-centered plan and behavior support plan. When there is an incident involving physical contact or alleged physical contact between 2 or more individuals that does not result in injury, or if an injury is sustained, can be treated as an internal investigated incident. Please familiarize yourself with the internally investigated injuries that is noted under injuries, in which we will discuss later. Please remember to notify adult or child protective services and police if applicable, and follow internal protocols as we are all mandated reporters. Next slide, please. After an abuse or any other incident occurs, many actions take place. We cannot emphasize enough that ensuring the individual's safety is #1. Here, you will also see additional questions to ask yourself as you are navigating through an incident. Was the aggressor removed from the individuals? At times, our initial reaction is to remove the person, and in some situations, they then may see themselves as the one at fault. It is usually best to remove the aggressor from the environment immediately. Then we begin to process the next step. Was medical attention warranted? Best practice is to have the person examined by a medical professional. Report the incident to the applicable parties, whether it be APS, CPS, or law enforcement. Allow time for a full investigation, and remember to always think about the person and what ongoing supports they may need to be successful. Even if you suspect abuse, you must report it. Next slide, please. As you can see, there are additional questions to ask yourself noted here on the slide that are not only related to abuse, but also applicable to many other types of incidents. So think of these questions when any incident occurs. Are supports in place to assist the person in coping with any physical or psychological trauma? Did the accused staff have all the required trainings? Were all notifications made, including family CCS or regional office? Next slide, please.
This is Mark from SMRO QE. I'm going to discuss neglect, hospital admission, ER, and injury type incidents. So neglect is another type 1 reportable incident. The definition in PORII states the failure to provide proper care and attention to an individual that results in significant harm or jeopardy of harm to the individual's health, safety, or well-being, and failure to provide life necessities such as food, clothing, shelter, medical treatment, supervision, or a safe environment. Next slide. So when do you report neglect? When there is any suspected or confirmed incident of neglect or mistreatment of a person at risk. Next slide, please. Hospital admissions and ER visits. Hospital admissions is the unexpected or unplanned admission or an inpatient service that is not documented within their person-centered plan as a need for frequent hospitalizations due to a chronic somatic or psychiatric condition. An example of a hospitalization due to a chronic somatic condition would be when a person who has chronic UTIs and is hospitalized because of the UTI. That would be internally investigated. But if they had a major surgery like bladder or kidney removal, that would require an incident report. The person must be admitted to the hospital, not just seen in the ER. When in doubt, contact the regional office. Next slide, please. So when do we consider hospital admission ER visit as an internally investigated incident? When an incident frequents the hospital and it is documented within their PCP, a provider can submit this as an internally investigated incident. When an individual seeks the ER for a visit and is not admitted, but are in observation and or treated and released, they are also considered internally investigated. At times, many of us will go to an urgent care facility to be seen instead of the ER. These incidents should be internally investigated unless there was a moderate or severe injury. Next slide. Okay. The definition of an injury is physical harm, hurt, or damage to an individual caused by an act of that person or others. Keep in mind, any injuries that result in medical emergencies that require immediate assessment and intervention are reportable incidents. Next slide, please.
Medication errors are the failure to administer medications as prescribed or administering medication that is not prescribed by a licensed physician. This would include an incorrect dose, wrong time, or wrong route of administering medications. Next slide, please. When are medication errors reportable to the DDA and OHCQ? Report the medication error when it has the potential to cause harm or results in requiring medical or dental observation by a doctor, nurse practitioner, dentist, etc., or if it results in the admission to a hospital or a 24-hour infirmary for treatment and/or observation. Medication errors are internally investigated when an error does not have any adverse effects that require medical interventions. But remember, medication errors are immediately reported to an agency designee per internal protocols. Next slide, please. So choking and death. Choking occurs when there's the obstruction of the flow of air from the environment into the lungs, whether it is partial or complete. When is choking considered to be a reportable incident? When the individual loses consciousness or receives CPR as a result of the choking, if the choking occurs as a result of the failure to train staff on an individual's specialized diets, or the failure to follow protocol for a choking victim. When the Heimlich maneuver or foreign body airway obstruction intervention is used and it is successful, this would be considered an internally investigated incident. Please also keep in mind individuals who have a history of choking and individuals' nursing care plans and their supervision levels during meal times. Unfortunately, individuals have passed away from choking from the lack of staff supervision. Staff walk away and prepare another individual's meals, they provide ADLs for others, laundry, or they take their own break. It is imperative to know the individual and what supports are in place or what proper training is needed. When an individual passes away, whether it is suddenly or expected, regardless of the cause, it is reported immediately. When completing an IR, it is helpful to note the exact location where the individual passed away. So not just saying hospice, but giving an exact name such as Gilchrist. Next slide, please. Now this brings us to our next polling question. So our next polling question is, do all injuries require either an internally investigated incident or a reportable incident? And our options are true or false. Okay, Allison, we can close that poll and show the results. So the answer to this is actually no. Injuries that may or may not require minor routine treatment do not require the completion of an incident report. These include minor abrasions, blisters that are intact and unopened, skin irritation, minor bruises or contusions of known origin or are the result of medical treatment, sunburn with no blisters or peeling, insect bites, stings, minor scratches, shaving nicks, or paper cuts. Okay, we actually have another polling question after this. So our next polling question is, if an individual lives at home with family and they reported to their CCS, they went to the hospital 2 days ago, does an incident report need to be completed? We'll give Allison a second to be able to pull that one up. So just to repeat it, the question is, if an individual lives at home with family and they reported to their CCS, they went to the hospital 2 days ago, does an incident report need to be completed? Our options are yes or no. Okay, Allison, we can go ahead and close the poll. So the answer is yes. Any individual receiving any type of DDA-funded service must be reported via PCIS-2. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Caroline. Now we will discuss Type 2 incidents per PORII. Type 2 incidents are primarily reviewed and investigated by the DDA Regional Office QE team. We will discuss each Type 2 incident more in depth, but they include law enforcement, fire department, emergency medical services, theft of an individual's property or funds, unexpected or risky absence, restraints, and other. Next slide. Law enforcement is one of the reportable incidents that the regional offices within DDA reviews. Here we will go over reportable versus internally investigated when it comes to law enforcement. Law enforcement is reportable when they are responding to an individual's behavior. This individual does not have a behavior support plan in place or the BSP was not implemented, and or they are a safety risk to themselves or others, are all considered to be reportable incidents. At times, we have encountered law enforcement reporting due to a participant's behaviors, and then they are transported to the hospital to be evaluated for psychiatric admission. If the person was admitted, then this would be considered as a type 1 incident, hospital admission for psychiatric purposes. If the person was evaluated and released, it would be considered law enforcement. When an individual is arrested and taken into custody, this is considered a forensic case within the DDA. Many times, law enforcement will respond to a call related to theft, but that should be reported as theft and not law enforcement. We will discuss thefts later on. Next slide, please. Internally investigated incidents occur when police report to an incident, but a police report is not taken, or when they respond to an individual's behavior, but they are considered not to be a safety risk to themselves or others. One key item to remember to gather when in the middle of an incident involving law enforcement is the police report number, badge number of the officer, and all of their contact information. This will help aid additional information if it is needed when reviewing the incident report. Next slide, please. Fire department and/or emergency medical services is very straightforward when it comes to reporting. Any incident that requires the fire department or EMS is considered reportable. Please remember to gather contact name and number of emergency personnel to include in the reporting. Next slide. Theft. Theft is when any suspected or confirmed misappropriation of an individual's personal property or money occurs. When it is determined to be valued at $50 or more per incident or $100 or more stolen over the course of 30 days is considered to be reportable. Anything less than $50 would be internally investigated. Next slide, please.
Unfortunately, there are times that unexpected or risky absence of an individual does occur. It is imperative when the individual is missing for more than 4 hours or is an immediate danger to themselves or others that all parties are made aware immediately. This includes police, families, and the DDA. The list can go on, but each agency should have their own internal protocol to follow and follow all PORII requirements. There are times that missing persons reports are noted on social media, and the DDA is the last to be informed. The DDA needs to be aware immediately. A quick email to the regional office's QE's Triage, or if it's after working hours, a call to the after hours number communicating the incident and that an incident report would follow per guidelines would be most appreciative. Next slide, please. Restraints include any physical, chemical, or mechanical intervention that is used to impede the individual's physical mobility. Next slide, please. It is important to remember any restraint that involves an individual that does have it noted within their approved behavior support plan, a restraint that is not part of the DDA approved curriculum MANT training, if it restricts the movement of the individual as a substitute for programming or disciplinary purposes, and lastly, if the restraint results in an injury. Next slide, please. Chemical restraints are those medications that are used to restrict an individual from moving. At times, some individuals will require a chemical support to sedate them for a medical procedure. An example would be teeth cleaning. This would not need to be reported as it is a preventative measure and not a response to a behavior. Just a reminder that chemical restraints are not permitted to be used as a response to sedate a person due to a maladaptive behavior. When a restraint does occur, Please keep in mind, per COMAR, a team meeting will need to be convened within 5 calendar days to review the situation and action taken. Other areas of consideration when reporting an incident are: does the individual have a behavior support plan? If so, is the behavior targeted in the behavior support plan? Or is the development of a behavior support plan needed? Is the restraint documented in the person-centered plan? What medication and how was the medication administered? And in what setting did the chemical restraint occur in? Did the restraint occur as a result of the health and safety of the individuals and or others? Next slide, please.
Reportable incidents. At times, some incidents occur that are not specifically labeled or outlined in PORII, in which we could classify them as other when they impact the health and safety of an individual. A few examples of this may be a suicide threat or an attempt, or a communicable disease outbreak for a CDC or local health department. And as outlined earlier in the presentation, when there are 3 internally investigated incidents within a 4-week period regarding the same individual, then the 3rd incident would be considered reportable. Other incidents could include a vehicle accident with potential of injury and all newsworthy events. Many times the DDA staff will see social media posts of missing individuals that were not reported. So please remember, these incidents are highly important and need to be reported immediately. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our last polling question. Let's see which one comes up, because I think we're out of order, Allison. So put one up and let's see what we have. Okay, yeah, this is one we skipped. So let's go back. We'll do this one now because we did the other one. If an individual lives with family and reported to the 2 days ago, is an incident report required? Yes or no? You could close that poll, Allison. Okay. It was yes. And the answer is yes. An individual receiving any type of DDA funded service must be reported via PCIS2. Thank you. Next slide. These are some important reminders when completing incident reports. The first step when an incident occurs is always to ensure the safety of individuals. This could mean you remove them from the environment, put safety measures in place immediately, or provide first aid until further evaluation. But safety is all of our #1 priority. Then we begin to make notifications to all appropriate personnel. Remember, incident reports are to be communicated to regional offices immediately. Email is always the best way since it will be documented. You can call the regional office even on weekends and holidays, as there is someone on call. Also remember that an incident report is required to be submitted into PCIS2 within 1 working day. Include the immediate actions that are going to take place to ensure the health and safety of the individual and how it will be maintained during the investigation. Next slide, please. Okay. Also remember to be as specific as possible. As much information that you can provide in an incident report is helpful. Note the final diagnosis. Do not use acronyms. Provide a short description, as it may not necessarily be a nurse reviewing the incident report. If you notice an error within the incident report, or if there was a duplication of an incident report and one needs to be withdrawn, please contact your regional office QE. QE will need to enable the process. For withdrawing an incident report, you will need to provide the reason why it needs to be withdrawn. Please keep in mind, AIRs are due within 10 business days. Be as specific as possible with a full description of the incident, along with the remediation strategies. What was the final outcome? Were the staff retrained or suspended? Was there a team meeting? Was a behavior plan developed? Think of these types of questions and ensure someone from the outside can read the entire incident report from start to finish and understand the full picture. Please be prompt to any inquiries about DDA and/or OHCQ. Incomplete information, inadequate follow-up information, or even a lack of responsiveness will engender closer monitoring by the DDA and/or an on-site investigation by the Office of Healthcare Quality. Last but not least, when in doubt, if an incident report is reportable or not, contact your regional office. Contact QE to have that discussion. We've also included the direct link to PORII that you can reference at any point. And please reference the FAQs at the end of PORII. Next slide, please.
Please remember that it is extremely important for you to report all suspected or confirmed incidents of abuse, neglect, exploitation, and death to the DDA regional office immediately after securing the safety of everyone. Also provide immediate notification of events that may be newsworthy, events involving arrests, critical injuries, and events that place participants at risk. You are also required to report any incident that negatively impacts the health and safety of the individuals. Here we've included all of the designated emails for each of the regional office triage emails, along with the OHCQ email to report incidents. These mailboxes are reviewed Monday through Friday, except for state holidays. Next slide, please. Please make sure you take note of this page as it has all of the statewide regional office contact information. Please utilize the regional offices if you have any questions or concerns. We've also listed the after-hours numbers for your reference. If there were any emergencies to report, please use the listed numbers on this slide. Also note you can reference the DDA website for DDA's headquarters contact information if you need additional assistance. Next slide, please.
Before we conclude this meeting, I would like to remind everyone that we will be conducting a PORII training specifically for people and families that incorporates plain language, which will be held on August 24th at 10 a.m. Thank you again for everyone for attending today's webinar, and we will be following up with a Q&A within 2 weeks of today's webinar.